Now, we are very excited about our first keynote speech today. We're very happy to our keynote speaker, Dr. Darlyne Haan, the Director of Curriculum and Instruction for Math and Science at Bridgeton Board of Education. She's also the administrator and creative founder of Mad About Science in the USA. So now she's going to talk about the topic of the Trifecta, ELs, and the Leaky STEM pipeline in culturally responsive teaching. So let's welcome Dr. Haan.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so very much. I want to thank very much the International Conference on Bilingual Education and Dr. Jane for the invitation to keynote today, for this awesome opportunity to share what is something that I am extremely passionate about. And I am hoping that I'm going to set the tone for a 2-day conference and really get us thinking about what we can do to help improve bilingual education in STEM fields. So let's begin. So one of the first things that I want you to know about me is I have this passion. And one of my passions is to change the face of STEM so that it reflects the population. So it is as diverse as the population of which we live. And one of the reasons we need to do this is because a lot of times, and too many times, students that do not speak English or are learning English are left out of STEM and higher math and science opportunities, as well as females and low income people, students from low income communities and minorities. So today we're going to talk about exactly what's causing this, which is a leaky STEM pipeline, how we can use culturally responsive teaching to make a change. And then the biggest part is to understand and learn how we can teach language and content simultaneously. So first of all, we have to understand what is STEM, right? So a lot of people, when they think of STEM, they think of, oh, if my student takes science, then I'm doing STEM. If my students take math, then I'm doing STEM. That's not what STEM is. What STEM is, it's the ability for students to problem solve and critically think. And those are skills that have to be trained. They have to learn how to do them. And what also happens through STEM is that students learn to work like scientists. They learn to collaborate, they learn to communicate, to read, write, speak, and listen to each other in the language of English. Science is one of the strongest content areas where kids can truly learn language. And that's what this presentation is about. What does it look like and how do we do this? So we're going to start off by stating something that a lot of institutions, educational institutions do not practice, and that is that language is a part of doing science. It's not a precursor nor a prerequisite for doing science. And a lot of educational institutions believe that before students can take a STEM or a science or a math class, that they have to have proficiency in English. And that is not true. What happens in science is students are provided opportunities to practice in many different registers and modalities. They start with language that is unsophisticated and they gradually become more sophisticated through this science environment, as long as the science and STEM environment is hands-on and inquiry-based. So because what we have to understand is that when students are working in small group or they're working peer-to-peer, then they work in small group and large group, and then they present, and then they work with the teacher, the language becomes more sophisticated. And that is something that is done through the sciences. So we have to really understand that language and content can be learned simultaneously. And so by the end of the presentation today, I'm going to be sharing with you strategies that teachers can actually use for this to occur. Because if you think about it, it takes generally 5 to 7 years for students to reach proficiency in a language. So if you have a student who is starting to learn English by the age of 9, they would have finished schooling without having the opportunity to be in the advanced classes. And that's what we need to understand. We can't wait that long. So we have to figure out, how do we get kids to be able to learn both simultaneously. So we're going to begin by discussing the leaky STEM pipeline. So what I want you to do for a second is, I want you to think about, if you had a leaky pipe and you were just about to go to sleep and you hear the faucet dripping, it would drive you absolutely crazy, right? So you would try everything in your power to stop this leak, because listen, it would drive you nuts. You would not be able to sleep. So what you would do is, you would try to be able to seek a solution to figure out what is causing the leak. How can I fix the leak and plug the leak so that the dripping stops? And this is the same thing we have to do in the math and science and STEM classroom. We have to try to figure out what is causing this leaky STEM pipeline, where we are losing females, we are losing English learners, we are losing minorities, and we are losing low income students to opportunities in STEM. So this is what the leaky STEM pipeline looks like. So these are grade based on American grades. So we have to first engage the students from as early as 5 years old, when they begin school, till about 14 years old. This is the time frame when they have to be exposed to STEM, math, and science. Then we have to recruit them by taking the higher levels of math, higher levels of science, to engage them in hands-on and inquiry-based sciences from the ages of about 13 to 18 years old. Then we can maintain it and sustain it when they go to college and careers. But between this age here, the engage and recruit, there are structural barriers that keep certain population of students out of STEM careers. They keep them out of this pipeline, that they need to follow certain courses so that they can graduate and have an interest in STEM and experiences in STEM. Some of these barriers are registration fees, right? So if they're trying to do STEM outside of school, there's registration fees. But if they don't have that income, they're going to be not have that opportunity to be a part of it. Lack of prerequisite knowledge in the English, in that language, that's going to be a barrier that's going to keep them out of the STEM field. Competitive application processes, inability to demonstrate pre-existing interest in STEM or in science because of this language barrier, poor literacy skills, as well as lack of transportation. These are the things that cause us to lose so many kids to being able to graduate and have the experiences needed for a STEM career. So we have to ask ourselves, what causes these holes in the pipeline where we're losing so many students? So if you imagine this as being the leaky STEM pipeline, right? As being the pipeline to STEM, we see in the beginning, we have tons of kids that are interested in the sciences, right? So we have pink, which can be our girls, and we have blue, which can be our boys. But what happens as we go through the pipeline? We're losing students for the reasons of those structural barriers. And look how few actually make it through the pipeline. Hardly any females, hardly any minorities or English learners. So we have to ask ourselves, what constitutes this where we're losing so many students? And we have to look at three important factors: stereotypes, unconscious biases, and cultural beliefs. Because these three beliefs and practices create this institutional practice that inhibits girls, minorities, and English learners from continuing careers in STEM. So what I'm going to do now is, I'm going to explain to you very quickly through a short video how culturally responsive teachers and practices can help us get through these unconscious biases. We all have them. Every single one of us have unconscious bias because it has to do with how we grew up and the cultural beliefs that we have and we've heard all of our life and the stereotypes that we have. So when this enters the classroom, we have to be really, really careful as educators to understand how to control our biases and keep them out of our perception of certain students and certain genders. That keeps them out. So there's going to be a 2-minute video that I want you to listen to, and they're going to talk about this thing called blind spots. And the blind spots are the unconscious biases that we all possess. Here we go.
Are you seriously considering her as a candidate?
Just don't trust.
She's a man.
That's not me. I'm not like that. You call it an honest mistake. Science calls it a blind spot. Our unconscious mind is a mysterious and powerful thing. It makes 90% of our decisions without us even knowing it. Our brains are overloaded with 11 million pieces of information every second. Yet we can only process about 40 of them. So we're wired to make cognitive shortcuts, using past experiences to make assumptions. And you know what happens when we assume. Our unconscious mind can put us on autopilot, determining where we sit, who we eat lunch with, who we turn to for advice, and who we choose to offer a helping hand. Living our lives with blind spots can put us in a tunnel. Same point of view, same decisions, same outcomes. We can find ourselves trapped in the land of snap judgments and misconceptions. We've all been on both the giving and receiving end of blind spots. Think about it. Who's talented? Who's able? Who can I trust? Who belongs? We've all been there. Blind spots are part of the human condition. Our choices have consequences for us and the people we interact with. By accepting that blind spots exist, we can stop. Imagine what possibilities exist if we could do it all over again. Different perspectives, inclusive relationships, diverse networks, better outcomes, seeing people for who they really are. People like you with unlimited potential. We all have blind spots. Once you accept that you have them, you can choose to do something about it. It's time to check your blind spots and focus on what's possible.
So those are what we call blind spots. It's things that we have, that we can say things and have these beliefs and not even realize that it's impacting instruction for our students. And we all have them. So I like this picture. So what this picture, if you had the time and you could examine this picture, you would notice a few things. Number one, there's no females. None. There's no females in this picture. We can also assume there aren't many English learners. There aren't many minorities, and very rarely any people from low-income communities. This picture is something that we must change. And the way that we can change this is we can change it by understanding that we have to provide supports and address the achievement gap that occurs between these different populations and these genders. So when we do this, so you say, well, how can I provide these supports so that the population looks like this, right? We need to make sure that the STEM careers are as diverse as the population from which we live. And how do we do this? We do this by having continually embedded professional development. What this means is there are coaches who go into the classroom and help the teachers, number one, address their biases and realize that their biases exist. And how do we teach with our biases that we have? Number two, to use culturally responsive teaching. We need to understand the different cultures so that we can better teach them, because we need every culture from every gender to feel welcome. and that they are a part of the classroom and that they are a part of the community. And we also have integrated curriculum. And what that means is that we need to, when we are creating our curriculum and when we are teaching, we need to make sure that we are teaching it with language in mind. You can teach science, you can teach math, you can teach them, and simultaneously teach the kids English. It can happen. And this is how we're going to begin the process. There are 5 principles that guide the development and enactment of quality instruction for English learners. 5 important parts. Academic rigor. A lot of times what happens is that we remove the rigor from the classes for our students who either don't speak English, or for our girls who might feel can't handle the load, or for a minority or low-income students. Once we remove the rigor, we create what's called dependent and independent learners, which I'm going to touch on next. We have to make sure every time we create our content that we're going to teach, that we maintain a language focus. We have to ask ourselves, how are they going to read, write, listen, or speak? How are they going to practice those things within the classroom? Because even though we might be math teachers or science teachers or STEM teachers, we are all teachers of language. And we have to embed how to teach language within our content area. We have to maintain high expectations for all students. And a lot of times this becomes very difficult if our belief system says that, oh, girls don't belong in physics, girls don't belong in calculus. We're going to teach according to that belief. If we believe that, oh, Darlyne she doesn't speak English well, so I'm going to water down what I give her because I don't think she can handle it. That takes away the high expectations. And we have to have high expectations for every single student. We have to check our curriculum for the quality of our curriculum. Meaning, in our curriculum, do we have embedded in our curriculum how we teach ELs? What the language proficiency of students are and what they can do at those levels of language proficiency. Are we teaching our students with the highest quality of instruction where we're differentiating and scaffolding that instruction? We have to follow these 5 principles so that we can begin this process. Now, when we speak about dependent and independent learners, we create them as educators, believe it or not. We do this, right? And this is how it occurs. So this is going to be like, this is for simulation processes only, okay, to simplify this process. So if you look at these two problems, A and B, okay, if you were to read A, where it says that Shing, Bonnie, Winnie each bake some loaves of bread, and Shing bakes 6 loaves, Bonnie bakes 8 loaves, and Winnie bakes 4 loaves, the student cannot solve this problem without continual support from the teacher. There's no question here, right? So what's the student going to do? I need more help. I can't do the problem. Can you help me? This is what happens when we're creating dependent learners, because the teacher is going to teach in a way that doesn't allow the students the opportunity to work within their zone of proximal development. They're not going to teach the student in a way where they have productive struggle. That student will always be dependent on the teacher to provide them with guidance on how to complete the problem. That is a dependent learner. So if we believe that students who are learning English can't do the work, this is how they're going to be taught, in a way that they're always dependent upon the teacher. But if we look at problem B, it's the same problem in the beginning, but as you notice, as you go from A through D, the complexity of the problem increases. Students who are taught like problem become our critical thinkers. They become our problem solvers. They learn to work together and collaborate and struggle. This is what
Mama
happens.
is listening.
This here, we are creating.
You put this on the magbantay tayo. You don't.
Okay? These people, these students can now become productive struggle, right? They're going to become the critical thinkers. They're going to become the problem solvers. They're going to be able to advance. They're going to make it through the pipeline because they would have been given the opportunity and the learning as to how to think. So when I talk about being, a dependent learner and an independent learner, this occurs because of our biases. And that's why culturally responsive teaching is so very important, because it teaches the teachers to address their bias, to accept that they have them, because every single one of us has them. But they have to be able to recognize it and fix their instruction to catch themselves so that we don't create dependent learners. Okay, that's extremely important. Now, if we look at this picture, this is one of my favorite pictures, right? Because it explains visually what happens between a dependent learner and an independent learner, right? The difference between a dependent learner and an independent learner creates the achievement gap. Research states that if we want to close this achievement gap, we have to do culturally responsive teaching. We have to understand about different cultures. And I'm going to give you an example. A student is online at school and he wants to sharpen his pencil. So he's waiting on the line to sharpen his pencil, but the teacher is ready to start the class. So the teacher goes to the student and says, I'm going to pretend it's me. Darlyne, Darlyne, I'm about to start class. Will you sit down? And the student says, no. So the student is saying no because the teacher said, would you like to sit down? In his culture, what happens is he answered the question. He respected that person as an adult because in his culture, it's taught, please sit down, right? But he didn't hear her tell her to sit down. He heard her say, will you take a seat? And in the teacher's culture, the question is understood to be a statement. So she is angry now and most likely going to send him for discipline. So when we say culturally responsive teaching, that means that the teachers understand the different cultures so they can address the student the proper way. That is culturally responsive teaching. So in this example, if you see here with the guy, he's being led. There's somebody already creating the pathway for this person, right? They're going to make it through the pipeline because they're giving the guidance to get there. When we look at the female here, which can be our females, our English language learners, and our low-income minority students, what is she doing? She has to create her own pathway. No one is helping her. It's going to be harder for her to make it. She's not going to get there as fast as him if she gets there at all. And this is how we begin to create the achievement gap. And this is why culturally responsive teaching is so important, because the chances are she's going to fall through the crack eventually because she's not going to be able to keep up. So as we know, or may not know, TESOL has 6 principles for exemplary teaching of English language learners. These are 6 critical steps that they say if these are followed, our English language learners will be successful academically in their content areas as they're learning English. The first one is know your learners. And what that means is understand their culture. And the example I just gave you, We have to understand the culture so that we know our learners. Our environment in our rooms have to be representative of the kids in the classroom. The second one is we have to create conditions for language learning. Everything that we do in that classroom, regardless as the content for which we teach, has to have a language focus. If kids are learning in English, everything that teacher does has to have a language focus for English. The kids have to be given the opportunity to hear the language. They have to be given the opportunity to speak the language and to write the language, right? We have to be able to have this environment where the students do not feel anxiety. If a student does not feel welcome in that environment, the student will have anxiety, right? If there's anxiety, students cannot learn. It is brain-based, and that's a whole nother presentation. But if the brain is stressed, the students will not learn, period. So we have to make sure that we have this environment where kids feel welcome. We have to design high-quality lessons for language development. That means that even though we're writing the content objectives for the STEM that we're teaching or the math or the science that we're speaking, we have to also acknowledge what language objectives. How are they going to demonstrate their understanding of the content in English? Are they going to have to write something? Are they going to have to speak it or explain it? How are they going to be able to show it? So when you write your content objective that kids are going to be able to add, subtract, add fractions, right, with uncommon denominators, we have to also say that the students will be able to explain the steps for how to find the common denominator or how to make equivalent fractions. Both of those have to exist. We cannot just have content objectives. We must have language objectives as well. We have to adapt lessons as needed, right? Check for understanding. Students are going to come to us with different levels of language proficiency. Each level has a different ability as what the kids can and can't do and how the kids will respond. If teachers do not know that a student at the beginning of the first level of language acquisition, that's the silent stage. So how are they going to be able to show you what they know? You can have them point, you can have them draw, right? There's different things that you can do. You have to know that so that you'll know how to check for understanding for students at these different levels of language acquisition. Teachers must understand them, regardless as the content of which you teach. The fifth one is monitor and assess the student language development. Give ongoing feedback. And we're going to talk about these strategies next. So the kids have to constantly hear, how are they doing? What's the feedback? And we don't want to hear like, oh, Darlyne, you're doing great. No. Oh, Darlyne, you created that sentence very well. Oh, I like how you explained what happened. We want to be able to provide the students with specific feedback so they know exactly where they're strong and exactly where they need to improve. And the sixth one of TESOL's principles is to engage and collaborate within a community of practice. We must reflect. Whether we're meeting with our group, our teaching peers for the grade level that we're teaching, or we're reflecting on the lesson that we ourselves taught. How did I do? Where can I improve? What things do I need to do better next time? Oh my goodness, I said, I made the mistake of saying that Darlyne, is really struggling. Is that because I believed she's struggling? Is that one of my unconscious biases? We have to continually reflect so that we can improve the instruction. Were my language objectives clear? Right? Did I follow the strategies which are now to follow? So what I'm going to do now is I picked 4 strategies and how you would use them in the classroom. And then I used the STEM lab, one of my favorite STEM activities, which is making a bouncing ball. And I want to show you what that would look like in the classroom so that you'll have an better idea as to how you apply these strategies within the classroom. So here we go. Here are strategies. So the first strategy is connecting with students. Okay? That's that know your student. TESOL's first step, right? Know the culture. And this is why this is so very important. The brain works on trust. Your brain likes two things, pleasure and safety. Those are two things the brain strives for. If the brain feels that they're in a stressful situation, or they're in a classroom environment where they're not welcome, or they feel that the teacher doesn't like them, or the teacher is making comments that make them feel uncomfortable because of their improficiencies or imperfections in English, your body releases cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone. They shut down. The amygdala, which is one of our alert systems, is going to say, up, there's a lot of stress. And what it does is it cuts communication to the prefrontal cortex, right? Where we learn, everything goes down to the lower brain and the kid is on autopilot. Once the kid goes into stress, there is no learning. And the only way that you can open that back up is through what they call a brain break. You have to do something, a joke, have the kids get up and stretch, touch their toes. You have to do something to remove the stress from the student. The second one is it happens from the parasympathetic part of the brain, and that's approach. If they feel that they, can approach the teacher and that it's a good environment with the kids, the brain is going to release dopamine and serotonin. Those are feel-good chemicals, right? Those are things that make us happy, that make us feel really good. Now the kid can learn because they're in a great environment. And the third one, which is from the polyvagal system, is for the connection. Did you ever wonder why there are certain TV shows that you really, really like, or you really connect with an actor or actress, and you just want to watch that show and you don't miss it every night? That's because there's something that you feel a connection with that person or that show, and your brain has released oxytocin. And oxytocin is that really good feeling that you feel connected. When you have dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin being released, that student is in their optimal form for learning. That's why the environment is so very, very important when learning. The second one is teacher talk. How the teacher speaks is very, very important. We want to make sure that teachers repeat and rephrase, because we have to give, which we're going to talk about in a second, the brain a chance, right? They have to do the translation. The kids have to be able to translate it, so they need to hear it more than one time. The teacher needs to enunciate the words, use simpler sentences and sentence structure. And the number one thing, wait time. When you ask a question, give it wait time. And this is what I used to always say. 1, 2, 3, 4, got to wait a little more, right? Because you want to be able to provide this ability for the students to process this information, especially because it's not in their L1. It's not in their native language. And by doing this, we're able to give the students opportunities, okay, to learn the language, to hear it, and to give them a chance to formulate how they're going to respond. Teacher talk is very, very important. And this is another reason why teacher talk is important. Our brains can only hold so much information at a time, right? So if they're between 5 and 14, they can take between 3 and 7 bits of information. If they're 14 or older, they can hold between 5 and 9 bits of information. So normally I do an activity with this, but for the sake of time, I wasn't able to do it. So what this means is, if I were to give you 15 letters, flash it on the screen for 10 seconds, and take it off of the screen, and then I were to ask you to write down as many letters as you can remember in order, you will most likely fall between 5 and 9 of the letters only you would be able to remember. There are going to be those who are going to be exceptional and remember more, but most of us are only going to remember 5 to 7 bits of information. So think about it. If you can only hold 5 to 7 bits of information, a student who's learning another language has to use that same 5 to 7 bits of information to translate and then learn the content. It's too much. So you have to provide the information in pieces, in chunks, is what you have to do. That's why you want to repeat and rephrase. That's why you want to have wait time. That's why you want to use visuals, so that the students can have a connection where they don't have to use as much of their working memory. And you also want to allow native languages to be spoke as well, especially in the beginning. Then as they progress, you allow it less and less. So working memory is a real thing. So you have to remember when you're giving instructions, give a little bit of instruction, repeat it, have the kids repeat it, give the next set of instructions. But you just can't slew off 50,000 things, because they're going to be like, I don't know, what do I do after this? That's what's going to happen. So you got to remember the brain is limited on how much information it can hold at one time. But if we use prerequisite information, that does not take up working memory, because the kids have a schema for it already. Next one, which is the hardest one, is academic vocabulary, right? Science is full of academic vocabulary. Mathematics is full of academic vocabulary. So we can use symbols, we can use graphs, we can use gestures and body language, we can use visual aids, realia, use the real thing, or graphic organizers. So there's also a belief, and I follow this through Dr. Stephen Krashen, who he says vocabulary words should be taught after the kids have seen it in a different way. So let's say, for instance, I'm going to use something simple like volcano. The kids might not know what volcano is in English. So you show a picture of a volcano, or you show a video of a volcano. Then the kids will be like, oh, then they'll know what that is in their language. Then you teach the word volcano. So you want to be able to provide comprehensible input. Somebody just put, that's exactly what it is, comprehensible input. So I'm going to show you an example of something that I do when I teach. I've taught my students whose English language was not English, and how I worked with word problems. So let's just say you have this crazy word problem, right? There's a lot of words involved in here. Now, what I did was I already went through it and removed certain words and made it simplified. But even so, this is a lot of information. It's a lot of words for a student whose first language is not English. What you can do is you can visualize the word problem. So I'm going to show you some of it, not the whole thing for the sake of time, but I just want to show you how I taught kids to be able to solve fraction problems with a piece of paper. Here it goes. A student in an elementary school has a cart full of whiteboard markers that she needed to distribute to 5 different classrooms. She went to a first grade classroom first and gave them half. So we fold the paper so the kids can see what half. And you show it to them and you would say, she gave half to the first grade class. And then you can say, first grade class. They gave half. So the kids will understand that this is given and this is what's remaining. And then it says, next she went to the second grade classroom and gave them half of the markers. The kids will understand that this is what's remaining. And if they gave half to the second grade class, you can draw a line and then we'll say this is for the second grade class. and that these markers are gone. So now the kids understand that this is what is remaining. Next, she went to the third grade classroom and gave them half. So you can either draw the line this way or you can draw the line that way. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to draw the line this way. And then this is the third grade class that got markers. So now they understand that this is all that is remaining. Next, she went to the fourth grade class and gave them half of the markers. So I'm going to go this way because this is half of this strip. And this is the fourth grade classroom, right? So these are gone. So this is what is remaining. And this is the fifth grade class, of which has 200 markers. So now the kids can look at it visually and see how many markers each class got by comparing the sizes. Since these two sizes are the same, this must also be 200 markers. Since this piece here is equivalent to this must be 400 markers. Since this is half and this is half, this must be 400 plus 200 plus 200. So this is 800 markers. And since there's 800 markers here and 800 markers here, and this here is the same size as this must be 1600 markers. So as you can see, I visualize the problem for them because a lot of times when they're teaching, they have a problem with certain of the remaining. How many is half? There's a whole lot of halves in the problems, and this can really throw the kids off. You can use something like this for decimals and percents and all kind, fractions or however you want to do it, but it provides the students with a visual, and then you can now start teaching the vocabulary of the problem because the kids have a visualization of exactly what the word problem is asking. So when we talk about using visual aids for students, it can be pictures of it, or it could be something that you yourself are doing by modeling as well. Let's see. The next one is the last one I'm going to touch is writing skills. Everything in writing we need to be able to scaffold, right? We have to scaffold the writing. Writing is one of the toughest pieces for students to do, especially academic writing. So what you can do in the beginning is you can provide for them sentence frames where you have the word started for them and then they fill it in. So that's our sentence frames. You can have sentence starters where you can just say, the horse was, or when I added glue to the solution, what happened? So that's a way that they can begin to start the process of writing so that they can begin understanding how do I formulate sentences in English. Now, mind you, you're going to have to help them as a teacher to understand it, but at least they have a better way of being able to participate in the class. And if you have them working peer-to-peer or in small group, they can work together to help understand this and get the answers together by working together. But sentence frames and sentence starters are huge. You can also use graphic organizers, where these kids can just use simple words to start making these connections and then use the sentence frames to be able to explain what happened in the graphic organizers. But these also give the kids visuals, and it gives them connections, and it gives them a platform for which they can begin their writing. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk very quickly about putting it all together. So this is one of my favorite labs, right? So this is about creating this bouncing ball. And the students have to decide how to mix all the different ingredients together and decide who can make the ball bounce the highest. So this is what happened. So I tried my best. I don't know if my Mandarin is correct, but I tried. So what I did was, you can take all of the ingredients and you can label them in the language of the students, right? So you have the English and you have whatever that language is. And then so the kids can start making this association. Remember, we want them to start understanding the words. So we have to work with the schema, with what they know. So in the beginning, I'm going to label everything, whatever it's in my classroom or whatever materials that I'm using, in the English and in the language of the language that they speak, their L1, so that they'll understand that. Now I'm going to show you very quickly how I modeled this. So as you can see, I show it, I'm not speaking at all, and then I have a label. So they would know exactly how much is needed and what I'm doing. Because of the brain, remember, 5 to 7 bits of information at a time, I would do up to a certain amount, then I would stop and then have the students model behind me. Then I would begin and do another part, right? And then stop and have the students model. As we progress and the kids' English progresses and they have more vocabulary in English and they're learning a little bit more in English, I can model longer periods of time before the kids actually begin it. But the kids need to be able to have a visual representation as to what the expectation is. So you want to model. You cannot just say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's the instructions. Go for it, right? It's not going to work. They're going to be stressed. The amygdala is going to ignite, what they call amygdala hijack. And then the students are going to just not be able to complete it and become very frustrated. So we want to make sure that we are modeling so that the kids understand what has to happen. For the other part that we can do is we can have graphic organizers for writing. We can do our procedures. I added pictures so they would know what happens in what order, so they would understand that. And then how they're going to do their data. So if this was a classroom, I would actually have done the first part for them, and trial 1 would have been completed, right? So they would say, okay, this is how much borax that I use for trial 1, how much glue I use, how much cornstarch I use, and then make the ball, bounce it, measure it, and see how high. So now they understand what I'm doing and what the expectation is. So we can do a graphic organizer for the writing, and we can also use a graphic organizer for the procedures and the data. They need the visuals. They can, I'm telling you, you can teach language and science and math concurrently. So now they need to be able to hear and speak. When you allow the kids to work peer-to-peer first, small group, large group, and in a class, you have to practice the hearing and speaking. You cannot take a student, especially a beginning learner, and tell them to stand in front of the class and do a report. Number one, they're not speaking. It's the silent stage. When they are in small group or they're working one-on-one, the language is less sophisticated. They can point. Oh, yeah, I put this here, and then I put it over there. Oh, I have to grab this one. The language is very simplistic, but they can still interact. When they go to a small group, the English has to change. The language has to change, right? Because they're not going to be able to always point. They're going to have to be more specific as to what they did. When they get into large group, the language is going to become more sophisticated again because they're going to have to use more vocabulary. So when you're teaching with these students who are speaking English, you have to make sure that you are providing students the opportunity to work in these different registers. One-on-one, small group, large group. But you have to you have to know the level of language acquisition, okay? Because your beginning learner is not going to be standing in front of the class giving a report. They can draw pictures, right? They can create. Allow them to use that to be able to be a part of the class and to show what they know. So again, as I end my presentation to you today, or in the morning for you, we have to remember that language is a product of doing science. It doesn't need to be a prerequisite. It doesn't need to be a precursor. They can learn it simultaneously, but it's going to take scaffolding. It's going to take teachers to understand how this works. But most importantly, it's going to have teachers have to remember they are teachers of language. They are not just teachers of mathematics. They are not just teachers of science or STEM. They have to incorporate language into their lessons. They must understand the levels of language proficiency so they can properly plan for their students. And the reason being is because language and content can be learned simultaneously. Because if we want to create a world of diversity and STEM in the sciences, we must make sure that we are teaching students in a way and that we are providing students with opportunities where we are plugging this leaky STEM pipeline, because it does exist. And we are losing too many females. We are losing too many English learners. We are losing too many minorities and students who are low income because of the belief systems that how we teach our students, right? The leaky pipeline does exist, and we have to do what we can in order to plug by doing the culturally responsive teaching, because we want the population. When we research the word STEM or scientists or engineers, this is what we want to see. Because when I Google scientists, this is what every picture I had was this. And we need to make it so that it looks like this. So with that, I thank you so very much for your time. I am very excited for this conference, and I am open to questions. Thank you.